Alhamdulillah, it's an honor and privilege to welcome all the brothers and sisters to our second Palestine and Masjid al-Hikmah, Masjid al-Aqsa, exhibition, where we discuss, educate ourselves, and remind ourselves of our responsibility and of our duty towards Palestine and Masjid al-Aqsa. Subhanallah, the world we live in today, we see that there are so many things going on throughout the globe, and also within the world we personally live, our small little world that we live in. Personally, we have so much going on. And this sometimes makes us forget about the external world and our brothers and sisters, the struggles that they are going through. And the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned that when a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he is in the help of his brother, he is assisting his brother or his sister, then Allah Azza wa Jal will help him in his affairs. So in Islam, it's to help ourselves, to remove all the problems that we are facing in our lives, and to acquire the help of Allah Azza wa Jal in our lives. It's our duty to help our brothers and sisters. The key to the solution, the key to the problems and the solutions to those problems is by helping others. So Palestine is something which we don't want to forget about. We don't want it to be something where when it blows up on the news, we start doing rallies and we start doing things like this only. Rather, we want it to be a continuous thing. Every year, every few months, we remember and we actively do things to support our brothers and sisters in Palestine. Firstly, first and foremost, the most important aspect of this whole exhibition, something which we all need to take back, is we need to educate ourselves with regards to what's happening in Palestine. We need to educate ourselves with regards to what's going on. Only through education are we able to assist our brothers and sisters in Palestine whilst living in the West. So this is why one of the main focus of today's event and talk is education. And alhamdulillah, we have with us a very special guest, Dr. Ismail Patel, somebody who I've known, my whole life when it came to Palestine and the issues of Palestine. I've always heard of Friends of Al-Aqsa being right at the forefront within the UK, combating, challenging the Western narrative and making a difference, right? Alhamdulillah, Friends of Al-Aqsa, and I'll let Dr. Ismail talk more about what they do, but they've been operating as an organization for 25 years now. And they are making a difference within the West, nationally, and I believe so globally. And they are putting pressure and releasing resources to the public, to Muslims and non-Muslims, to educate them about what's happening over there. And they're making a difference. Alhamdulillah, they have 12 branches throughout the UK, and they are growing in number. And as we know, the Western media, they are more focused on things which meet their agenda. They will not propagate the true narrative and the true, horrible things that are taking place in the apartheid state of Israel. And this is where it is our responsibility as Muslims to educate ourselves and thereafter not shy away, not feel scared to talk about this, not feel scared, because this is one of the plots and plans that they make us feel that if you talk about it, you become an anti-Semite. They think that it's anti-Semitism just to talk about it. They make us feel like this. But the truth is, it's nothing to do with us having anything against Jews. It's Zionism. It's the whole state of Israel and what they're doing over there. So this is why it's very important we educate ourselves, understand, and thereafter we are able to invite other people towards this cause. So first, inshallah, to begin the program, I would like to show a video, inshallah. And I'll let Dr. Ismail later on, when I introduce him and bring him forward, talk more about the video as well, inshallah, and take the mic, inshallah. Yes. Sorry? The what? The flag? Are you sure? Okay. We'll fix it, inshallah. I actually got one brother to check before you put it up. That's why. So.
What would happen if you build a refuge in a place where other people already lived? In the next few minutes, you'll learn why this moral quandary is at the root of the struggle between Israelis and Palestinians, and what you can do to help achieve a just peace for everyone in the region. First, there are a couple of things it's helpful to understand. One, many Jews fled harsh persecution in anti-Semitic Europe, especially the Nazi Holocaust. Zionists encouraged massive immigration to historic Palestine, at that time a British colony, where Jews had an age-old connection and where small Jewish communities had long existed among large groups of indigenous peoples. But when the UN offered the Jewish immigrants the majority of the land for a new state called Israel, for the indigenous Palestinians who lived there, it was a massive destruction of life. They rejected the UN's partition plan, and several Arab states invaded the new state of Israel. Israeli forces essentially erased over 400 Palestinian villages and towns. By the end of the fighting, Israel controlled 78% of historic Palestine. And when 750,000 Palestinians who fled or were expelled during fighting tried to return to their homes where the new state now stood, they were permanently barred by the Israeli government. While over 100,000 of their relatives and neighbors who hadn't left became second-class citizens of the new state, along with the new Jewish majority. Today, Palestinian refugees and their descendants number in the millions. Most are in the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and Jordan. Many are spread throughout the world, with millions still living in refugee camps, seeking to return to their homeland. To sum up, one group of refugees found a much-needed home, but in the process, a new group of refugees was created. Here's the second thing to understand. Israel was founded as a Jewish state, but now ask yourself, what exactly does that mean? People have lots of ideas about what a Jewish state should look like. Some call for equality for all citizens. But what was created in practice was institutional discrimination against non-Jews. In other words, Israel ended up being built on a blueprint of exclusion. The Israeli government wants maximum land and resources for Jews, but not the Palestinians living there. That's why inside Israel, Jews get special privileges, including rights to land and housing, that are denied to the Palestinian citizens, who make up 20% of Israel's population. That's also part of why Israel has never defined its borders. In fact, they still hold on to land, the West Bank and Gaza, that they conquered in the war in 1967. Since then, Israel has built Jewish settlements throughout the occupied West Bank, in Jewish-only cities, and supplying them with infrastructure like roads and army camps, schools, and even a college. Military occupations were meant to be temporary, but after 40 plus years, this one looks permanent and entirely unjust. In the West Bank, Israeli Jewish settlers and Palestinians live on the same land, but must live under two completely separate and unequal systems of Israeli law. The Jewish settlers dominate the natural resources, including water and agricultural land, and are backed by the Israeli army. To maintain the occupation, Israel has demolished thousands of Palestinian homes and orchards, confiscated Palestinian land, bombed the captive civilian population in Gaza, and punished resistance with raids, arrests, and assassinations, all to gain maximum land, while making life so difficult for Palestinians that they will either leave or be too afraid to resist. Palestinians have fought back. For decades, they tried to achieve national liberation through armed struggle. Some groups still do, but the majority now support popular protest instead. The deeply harmful pattern of control, repression, and violence profoundly harms Palestinians living under occupation and Israelis living as occupiers. This must be broken to reach a peaceful and secure future for both peoples. Now that you understand the problem, what about the solution? What about peace talks? So far, over 2 decades of US-backed peace talks have actually made things worse by helping Israel continue the occupation. It's been years of talking while Israel massively expanded the Jewish settlements and literally redrew the map. Peace talks are good if they're real, but not when they're there to cover a land grab. So now what? The current world superpower, the United States, has been a terrible friend, enabling Israel's destructive and self-destructive expansion onto Palestinian land by funding the Israeli military, the biggest recipient of US foreign aid in the world. But there's another.
So I've left this part out, inshallah. I'll let, inshallah, Dr. Ismail, inshallah, expand on what we can do, inshallah, about this. So now I'd like to welcome, inshallah, our guest speaker, Dr. Ismail Patel, who has, alhamdulillah, traveled all the way from Leicester to deliver this lecture to all the brothers and sisters. I would encourage everyone to listen attentively, inshallah. Somebody with so much experience. He has authored many books with regards to Palestine Masjid, al-Aqsa. Some of the books are actually for sale outside as well. I would recommend brothers to have a look as well, inshallah. He's been very active in the scene of Palestine and Israel conflict for many years now. So listen attentively, inshallah, to what he has to share from his experience. And if you have any questions, then inshallah we can have a discussion after the lecture is over.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسول الكريم أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى الذي باركنا حوله لنريه من آياتنا إنه سميع بصير صدق الله العظيم. My respected scholars, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's really an honor and a privilege to be amongst you. I know you sacrificed on Sunday to be here, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inshallah reward you for you being here, inshallah. And hopefully together we can come to understand the issue better and hopefully as well try and encourage each other to help our fellow human beings and try and bring about justice in one of the most blessed land of Islam and Muslims, Baitul Maqdis, inshallah. So I'm going to start at if you like, at the end of my talk normally, because Maulana wants me to talk about what we can do as individuals living in Britain so far away. And then hopefully we'll go back and then talk about and then inshallah talk about the issue at hand, hopefully to give a brief history and a summary of the situation in the historical context and highlight some of the myths. The video that I was playing is very significant. It's done by a group called Jews for Peace. And there's certain things that I think I want to highlight as well later on, inshallah. Those who've looked at it very carefully might be concerned, and it needs a little bit of explanation. So we'll do that as well. Now, going back to the issue as what we can do. As Muslims, of course, first and foremost, is we should remember Masjid al-Aqsa and people, wherever they're oppressed, know du'as. I think it's extremely important to seek the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in trying to get his assistance so that whatever work we do, inshallah, there's barakah in it and we'll be able to have success. So that is the very, very least we should be able to do, is to remember Bayt al-Maqdis, Masjid al-Aqsa, and the people of Al-Quds in our du'as. And I request if there are people from other mosques or related or connected to other masajid, that at least on a Friday khutbah, we should remember Masjid al-Aqsa in our dua. And I think we should never forget that. And the power of dua is very, very significant. But dua without work or without effort, we all know it doesn't work. Even Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, greatest of the human beings, the greatest of the individuals ever created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he also had to make effort. He also raised his hand to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but then made effort. So it is the effort that is also required, and they both go hand in glove, if you like. You can't have one without the other, because it really doesn't make any sense at all. So the second thing is we need to educate ourselves, because without having the knowledge about the situation, we sometimes act on emotions, not knowing our facts, and that can be counterproductive, especially living in Britain. You may use words, say things emotionally, and your emotions may be rightly placed, but if you do not know the context, you might be taken aback. And here I will go through the video and hopefully we'll try and understand what I mean by really educating ourselves. And it's not very difficult. Alhamdulillah, now, you can go on the internet, find very reliable sources from either Friends of Alaqsa or other organizations and individuals who read about it. We have many from books from children all the way to adults. From children GCSE level, we've got a whole syllabus for Palestinian students, and then we have got stuff for university students and adults as well. So we've got a whole spectrum of material. If you simply want to follow us on the social media, you can do that and keep abreast of what is happening. That will allow you to understand. So education, again, it's not for the sake of being educated, not for knowing facts, but hopefully equipping us to be able to take some steps further. The other thing I would recommend is something from BDS, Boycott, Divestment and Sanction. I think this is extremely important for us living in Britain, that we do not consume or support anybody or anything that is associated with the state of Israel. And you may think that, Israel is such a big country, we are individuals, we only are going to spend a couple of pounds, what difference does it make? Let me explain to you. So if you go shopping, look at the products, and you see that's the produce of Israel and you do not buy it, and that is, say, £3 or £4, a small amount, a minimal amount for you. The first thing it's doing is what it's doing to you. You have moral and ethically decided not to consume something that originates from the place of injustice. That is oppressing your fellow brothers and sisters. And that is, I think, something immensely important and should never be underestimated, because it is making you a better human being. It's improving your way of thinking of how you consume things and where you're going to spend your money. The second thing is, you may think that £3 or £4 or £5 is insignificant, but when it's collectively done, it makes a big difference. Also, that £3 or £4 is an individual level. Just imagine for a second, it's a nightmare scenario, but imagine it's that £3 that is invested by you in Israeli product that benefits an Israeli company which supports the state of Israel, who goes and buys a bullet that costs around £3 that kills a Palestinian. So it is not insignificant. It is extremely significant of where we spend our money and however little that is. And we have to make sure that we do not indirectly or directly supporting the state of Israel. Because there's no point us raising our hands for dua when we are indirectly then going to support the state of Israel. So the boycott, divestment, and sanctions are very important. The divestment, of course, is a bigger campaign. We work with universities, companies, to make sure that they do not invest anything to do with Israel. That takes place at organizational level. Sanctions are also important, that we call upon our government, and this is where the next part also comes in, it's called campaigning. So we call upon our government to not support Israel by selling them arms, or some of them actually giving them arms, because these arms then are used, the military equipment is then used for occupation and suppressing the Palestinians. So when we have a government that tells us that they believe in human rights, international law, justice, we should hold them accountable. So campaigning aspect of this work is extremely important. And again, we don't need thousands of people, we don't need organizations. This can be done by each and every one of us who has a right to vote in this country. Because you can go and see your MP, you can write an email to your MP demanding that they do not do this. Just give you an example, in 2019, when Israelis attacked al-Aqsa, we had a campaign demanding that Israel, British government stop selling military arms to Israel. And we had a template letter on the website, and 180,000 letters were sent to British MPs throughout the country, to different MPs. This was the biggest campaign ever carried out against British MPs. We had many MPs get in touch with us, actually some of them saying, because they have to reply back saying for us to stop the campaign. But this is what we have to continue doing. Yes, they did not stop selling, Britain has not stopped selling arms to Israel, it is continuing doing that. But we have to put the pressure. Inshallah, with more collective pressure, more effort, things can change. So again, when we do it as a group, we know that we are forced to be reckoned with, that this is just not a few hundred people, 1,000, as I mentioned to you, how many people just wrote a letter to the MPs against this campaign. So campaigning is extremely important. Of course, the campaigning will come on different forms and guises, different requirements will take place. Sometimes a campaign might require a rally, sometimes a campaign might require standing outside a shop that is wholly promoting Israeli produce. Sometimes it could be outside a football stadium where Israel has been invited to come play football. So campaigning can take of different forms. Campaigning is extremely important for us. The other aspect, which I would highly recommend, and we really try and make sure that our brothers and sisters actually to partake, is visit Masjid al-Aqsa. There are many virtues of Masjid al-Aqsa. Inshallah, if we have opportunity, we'll go through them. But visiting Masjid al-Aqsa and Bayt al-Maqdis has been central to our history and our heritage. In fact, if you look at the history of most of our Sahabas, they visited Masjid al-Aqsa. The Prophet ﷺ encouraged this. Many hadith, collect the books of the hadith at the back for free, read them with your children at night, and learn about that, to see how close we are connected to Masjid al-Aqsa. So go to Bayt al-Maqdis, visit Masjid al-Aqsa, fulfill the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and his advice for this Ummah, and build that love with Masjid al-Aqsa. You can go anytime throughout the year, or we also recommend people in the month of Ramadan to go into itikaf in Masjid al-Aqsa. Alhamdulillah, just before COVID, we had something like 900 people from England to itikaf in Masjid al-Aqsa in the last minutes of Ramadan. So inshallah, join that group, make it bigger, and build a love for Masjid al-Aqsa. So these are some of the things that come to my mind immediately of the things we do. So it's make to educate ourselves, campaigning, and then visiting Masjid al-Aqsa and boycott, divestment, and sanction. These are the things all of us can do. And on top of it, I suppose at the end, is spread the word. So if you have an organization like ours, if you have a branch, as Maulana mentioned, we've got 12 branches, we haven't got one in Aberdeen. If you decide to have a branch in Aberdeen, then you can do that work locally. You can take our literature, spread it around in schools, colleges, in your town centers, give it out to people, go to churches. And in Britain, right across the country, particularly in Scotland, I know for definite, the majority of the people, and I mean right across the spectrum here, people of all faiths and no faiths, the majority of the British people support the Palestinians. Yes, our governments don't, but the people do. So, and they will resonate with this. And it will also give us an opportunity as Muslims to have that dialogue with our non-Muslim brothers and sisters in this country, and hopefully build a stronger relationship with them as well. So it is a means of dawah as well. So this is a great opportunity for us to carry on this work. So friends of Alaqsa's work and the work of like this, inshallah, should help us. So that's the first one. So what would you like me to do?
Inshallah.
Okay. And what I want me to talk about a little bit about the history of Palestine. This is very informal. So if at any stage anybody wants to ask a question, just raise your hand, and then we'll discuss anything. But what I want to do is I want to talk about, there's only a few slides actually, not too many slides. But whenever you discuss the issue of Palestine, and this is where education is very important, and all of us need to know a little bit about the situation, is there's a lot of myths about Palestine. And you're confronted with people who will try and challenge you. And of course, they're trying to secure their narrative and their ideas. So the very first myth, historically, and I've done this so that we also introduce you to the history of Palestine. The very first myth is Palestine was a land without a people, and therefore the Israelis, the Jewish community in Europe, could have gone there. And this is very, very famous in the Zionist narrative that, look, Palestine hardly had any individuals. It was sparsely populated, and therefore we had a right to go and occupy it. And here I want to touch on two aspects. The very first aspect is the fact that these pictures first and foremost demonstrate that not Palestine was a land with people, but it had its own identity. All these images you see are before the emergence of State of Israel. They had their own currency, they had their own stamps, they had their own industry, they had their own railway system. The railway system that went from Medina to Istanbul, went through Jerusalem, right across a part of what is Palestine. So they had their own system. It was not a land without a people. You always had a people, and that people were known as the Palestinian people. Yes, this is the time of the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire had rule over that area. But the region of Palestine exists, the people, Palestinians exist, and after that, what happens is the First War takes place, and Britain defeats the Ottoman Empire and takes over the land of Palestine. And then, technically, or even legally, what is known, this area that is known as the Mandate Palestine. Mandate Palestine. In Europe, what happens during this period, so we're talking about the First World War, so 1919, 1920, the oppression of the Jews increases to a point where the Jewish people and the anti-Semitism in Europe is so severe that they're now having to look for ways to move out of Europe. However, the European Jews would not want to go to Palestine. The European Jews would not want to go to Palestine. Sorry, one back.
No.
Right. The Palestinians carry on, the First World War carry on, the Jewish community in Europe is trying to stifle anti-Semitism, and most of the Jews are now concerned for their life. And a movement called Zionism emerges, which is trying to see a solution of how to take the Jews off Europe and find them a safe haven. And one particularly individual by the name of Theodor Herzl has this movement. And he goes to the European powers of the time, and particularly Russia, Germany, and Britain. He goes to Russia, they don't offer him anything similar to Germany, but Britain entertains the idea. And the British engagement with Zionism is quite interesting. They first offer him Uganda in Africa as part of the line. And another one, alternative, was South America, part of some say a little Argentina, but the mainland that Chamberlain at the time, the Foreign Secretary, offers Theodor Herzl is Uganda, to say that we will give you part of this if you take the European Jews out and you can have your own country. Theodor Herzl actually is quite excited about this project. He goes back to the European Jewish community to take his proposal forward, but none of them entertained this idea. And this meeting is a very, very important meeting called the Basel Conference, where it takes place in Switzerland. Finally, what we have is that the community, then the Jewish community decides and understands that if anything, if there's any potential of getting the Jews together in Europe, is to have some historical connections with that city where they're moving to, and that is Palestine. Because we absolutely accept that the Jewish community have lived in Palestine historically, they have got religious connotation with Palestine, and if you look at those pious predecessors from Salahuddin Ayyubi to Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, who allowed the Jewish people to live within the city of Baitul Maqdis. So we have no problems about that. Our problem starts because they want an exclusive state for themselves at the expense of the Palestinians, at the expense of the Muslims in particular. However, the Zionist movement is very interesting. What happens in the UN petition council? Second myth. So the first myth, as we talked about, is the idea of land without a people for a people without the land. Really, that does never exist. Palestinians always existed. That's it. That's it. That one. That's it. So the second myth, and this myth was reiterated in the video you saw, that the Palestinians rejected the UN petition plan. Somehow, that portrays as if it was the Palestinians who were offered something and they say no, so it's their fault for the crisis they find themselves in. And this is very, very important because what happens is between the First World War and the Second World War, you have two things happening. First, by the end of the Second World War, the British, as I mentioned to you, the British start controlling Palestine after the First World War. And during that period, they tried to move as many Jewish people from Europe into Palestine. It is very telling that if you look at the newspapers of the 1920s and 30s in Britain, because anybody wants to check, if there's any students here, this research is amazing. The way these newspapers refer to the Jewish migration into Europe is the same as what now those newspapers are referring to the refugees from Africa and Asia and the Middle East. They are bringing crime in our country, unemployment in our country, they're a burden to our economic resources. They did not want, as much as they don't want refugees now, they did not want European Jews to come into Britain. Okay, so the British government was assisting the Zionist movement to help them move the Jews from Europe into Palestine. Despite that, in 1947-48, what happens is Britain then gives the issue of Palestine to the United Nations. It says, we cannot deal with this issue because it's becoming too complicated. United Nations should deal with it. And those who know the history of the United Nations is just coming to the formation after the Second World War. It's a very new organization run almost exclusively by the Western powers, America, Britain, and France. Germany was been defeated in the Second World War, so it's very weak at that stage. So they're controlling the United Nations. In 1947-48, even despite all the migration that's coming through, despite the Holocaust that has taken place in Germany and the Jews being expelled from Europe, the population of Palestine now is only 37% Jewish. Only 37% Jewish. More important than that is the Jewish community only owned 9% of the land in 1947-48. 9% of the land. So population is 37%. They own 9% of the land. And then the United Nations decides, without asking the Palestinians are not asked to come at this conference. They've not been consulted. They have not been, there's not been a poll or investigation taking place what the Palestinians want. The United Nations exclusively decides to give 62%, how much? 62% of Madrid Palestine to the Jewish community, to the Zionists that have just come from Europe. Now ask yourself, when you own 9% of the land, less than 37% of the country, you have just arrived, literally, some of them weeks, months, years, no more than a decade, just literally a few years, you've come into this country, and then an institute like the UN decides 62% of it should belong to them. What would you do? It's absolutely rational that you reject it. That's it. You didn't ask us. But these people do not own any land here. the population is a migrant population. They just come as immigrants. So we don't mind, as Palestinians were saying, they can come here as refugees. We can live together. But what the Zionist movement wanted was an exclusive state. And the second aspect of this is this wasn't done in a background that everything was peaceful. So between the end of the Second World War, 45, 46 to 48, the British government sponsors Israeli military, the Irgun and the Stun Gang. These are two terrorist groups at the time defined as terrorist group by Britain itself. But they train them. They leave, when Britain leaves Palestine, they leave all the military equipment with them, not all, majority of the military equipment with them. This then group goes on a rampage, killing the Palestinians. Right, so there's a lot of trouble that are taking place. That's why Britain vacates. The United Nations then demands to petition Palestine. The Palestinians refuse, and then what's called the war takes place. This is really an attack by the Zionists upon the Palestinians. In that process, 531 villages are ethnically cleansed. 531 villages. 70% of Palestinians are made refugees, and they're refugees even today. So over 6 million Palestinians are refugees today from the time of 1947-48. There's a UN resolution called 194, number 194, which demands the right of the Palestinians to return. That UN resolution 194 has been enacted over 150 times, but Israel refuses to respect it. So they do not allow Palestinians to go back. And in the process, we had massacres like Deir Yassin. There's just been papers released very recently in the last couple of years from the Israeli archives that shows that the Stern and the Irgun, the two terrorist Zionist groups, were directed, and the blueprint was provided to them to make sure that they kill as many Palestinians as possible. So this was an ethnic cleansing that was masterminded. And you have, in this process of where the 531 Palestinian villages are ethnically cleansed, 70% of the population is made refugees, is known by the Palestinian Western Al-Aqsa, the catastrophe. You can see why this is a catastrophe. And that's the second aspect of the myth, that Israel was not created by the United Nations, it was created at the hands or the end of the guns of the Israelis. And that creation of Israel as well is illegal under international law, because what you have is a criminal activity against the Palestinians, in which Palestinians are killed in order to create a state. Then, immediately after the emergence of the state of Israel, they pass a law, or the two things happen. Of course, obviously, then Israel, it calls itself a democratic country. It's a complete misnomer, which hopefully we'll discuss later. And then they pass two laws called the law of return and the law of absentee. These illegal acts are telling in their own right. So the law of return is amazing. What the law of return states, the Israeli law of return states, that any Palestinian who was not present in their house during the wars of 1947-48, remember what Israel has just done then, forcefully vacated them all out. And then they passed this law to say, if you're not in your house during the war time, you have no right of return. Yet the law is called the law of return. On the flip side of that, the second part of that law says that if you're a Jewish person born anywhere in the world, whether it be South Africa, Argentina, Russia, wherever you're born, then you have a right to come into Israel and you'll be given an automatic citizenship. So those indigenous people who were there for hundreds and thousands of years, you can trace their lineages, some of them as far as back as the liberation of Masjid al-Aqsa by Umar ibn Khattab and beyond that as well, right from the time, because Palestine is one of the earliest civilizational cities in the world. So you can trace all that lineage back. They don't have a right of return. But if you're a Jewish person born anywhere in the world, you have a right of return. This was called the law of return. The second is called the law of absentee. The law of absentee states that if you are not in your properties during the war period again, then anything and everything then belongs to the state of Israel. So if you had left your house, the houses belongs to them, the farms belongs to them, the properties belong to them, all the assets belong to them, all your investments, and Israel will rob and strip the Palestinians of everything that they had and possessed. So you have these two racist, discriminatory law that punishes the Palestinians and continues to punish them till today. Yeah. So this is a discriminatory process that takes place between 47 and then the next war takes place in 1967. This was again, I'm really sort of skipping to and we can discuss this more detail later on. In 1967, if you look at the narrative, the myth, again to talk about the myth, Israel will tell you, or the pro-Israeli supporters will tell you that Israel was minding its own business, it has just established itself, they just come from survived the Holocaust in Europe, and the Arab states, surrounding Arab states, wanted to annihilate us. They wanted to destroy us, and we somehow survived. It's a war of miracle if you look at the Israeli narrative. In reality, if you look at the two very, very important people during that time, Nathan Begin was the prime minister. He just read his quote there, the Egyptian army concentration by Nasser. He said, we must be honest with ourselves. We decided to attack him. It was an Israeli preemptive action. It wasn't this so-called Arab region around trying to attack Israel and take it over. And similarly with General Weizmann, who was the general during the war of 1967, that Israel had prepared itself for that war so that it would occupy Palestine. And what happens in the 1967 war is the rest of Palestine is occupied. That is West Bank and Gaza, part of Sinai and Golan Heights. What is interesting now is since then, since 1967, the United Nations, this so wonderful impartial organized institute, has decided that when they talk about negotiation and peace and a two-state solution, what they mean that Israel can have everything they occupied in 1947-48, which is 78% of Palestine, landed Palestine. And we're only discussing Gaza and West Bank. So that's what the two-state solution, and that is where the peace global negotiations centers around. And this is something very important for us to understand, that when those groups talk about peace and peace solution within this framework are really talking about undermining and selling Palestinians down the drain, because this is really accepting that the Israeli aggression that took place is fine now, and it doesn't matter, and all we have to now decide is what is going to happen to West Bank and Gaza. So what happened throughout the period, from 47 to up to now, is Israel has used a policy to undermine the Palestinians. That policy, of course, has been known as like a discriminatory, racist, violating human rights, international law. But recently, it has come to be defined as apartheid. Now, apartheid is a policy when the government tries to divide its community into two parts and make sure that it oppresses and undermines one group over the other. So it gets privileges to one group over the other group. And of course, apartheid was most famously practiced in South Africa, and this was done by whites against the indigenous African community. But apartheid simply does not mean there should be a color distinction. It can be also done through race or through the idea of different people. So the apartheid we see in Palestine, Israel, is the idea that the Jewish people are the privileged and the Palestinians, whether they're Muslims, Christians, or people of no faith, they have to be undermined and they have to be oppressed and suppressed. Now, if you look at what has happened in the past 12 months to 18 months, every aspect of Palestinian life has been undermined. You take the basic necessity like water, for example. No Palestinian in West Bank is allowed to drill a borehole or have a well of water without the permission of Israel. Israel normally refuses that permission. Most of the aquifers where the water resources come from, only Israel has the right to take that water. So Israel takes that water and then has complete exclusive right to the Palestinian water, and then sells it to the Palestinians at 10 times the rate it sells it to the Jews in Israel. Right? So a basic necessity like water is deprived. You have Israelis having excess amount of water vis-a-vis the Palestinians. Second aspect of right of movement, we might take things for granted. We wake up in the morning, those who have children, or we want to take our children to school. We don't think about it, we simply just do it. If you're a Palestinian, your right of movement is absolutely curtailed. So West Bank alone has 600 checkpoints. How many? 600 checkpoints. That means that if you leave your home to go to school, you could encounter a checkpoint. When you get to the school, which could be delayed, your child might be there, but the teacher may not have made it. The reverse journey is the same. So there is no guarantee that you can reach your destination. Similarly, if you want to access hospitals, it becomes very difficult. Most of the West Bank was also covered on top of the checkpoints that what's known as the wall, the apartheid wall. This wall is 700 kilometers, and it's not in a straight line. We normally think of a wall as a straight line cutting two communities. That wall actually circles towns in West Bank. So there's a town of Kalkilia, for example, it circles it completely, and it has only one exit and entrance point. So everybody within that town has to use one exit and entrance point. That exit and entrance point has an opening hours, but the Israelis could decide one day to close it early, and they do, or open it late. So if you have gone out of your town, say your village or your farm is outside, or you have to go into business outside, or you have to go to a hospital outside the town, and you come back and the gate is closed, you can't go back anymore. So this is what it means to be a Palestinian. This is what it means when people say the right of movement has been restricted. And this is happening again on a daily basis. I'll give you a few more examples. We talk about the fact that Israelis are held as detainees, as prisoners. Now, a detainee in Israel, what it means to be a detainee is when they arrest you, first and foremost, they will not tell you why you've been arrested. No charges brought against you. And if you're a detainee, you have no right of access to lawyers. And you can't go to a court, the illegal Israeli court. So you can't free yourself. Only the Israeli who has detained you can determine in any state to say, all right, we've had enough of you, we can go back. And there's one individual who's held in detention for 26 years. That's what detention means. And then on top of that, there's another aspect called arrest. And there are two different categories completely. If you're arrested, then they have to charge you, and then they have to bring you to court, and they have to release you. Last month in October 2022, one Palestinian was arrested every hour. This is UN statistics. One Palestinian was arrested every hour. Just think about that, brothers and sisters. What kind of life they're living. And this, we carry on when we think about house demolitions, and if you think about the number of people who are killed, I've only got the statistics for 2021, that's last year. Again, UN statistics. 320, just over 320 people were killed. That makes an average of one individual killed every other day. Every other day. This is the slow ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Palestinian people by Israel. But then if you look at the other side, that these Palestinians who are going under occupation, discrimination, and apartheid system are the ones at the forefront of defending Masjid al-Aqsa. They are the ones who are there occupying it. They are the ones who are there to perform salah. There's so many restrictions to enter Masjid al-Aqsa. At times, there's random restrictions saying anybody between the ages of 20 and 50 cannot enter the masjid. With all those checkpoints, sometimes it takes Palestinians in the West Bank, first and foremost, cannot enter Masjid al-Aqsa. Majority of them cannot make it. Those living within so-called Israel, the 47 area, they may make it, but they also have to go through checkpoints. And it could be possible that a journey that takes 15 or 20 minutes can end up taking 3 or 4 hours. Despite all that, they will go into the masjid, make sure there's a presence, and there's a daily violations of the holy Masjid al-Aqsa, with the Israeli settlers, with extremists, with the support of the Israeli army, will come and violate into the masjid, walk through the haram, our first qibla, and violate. Things we would never accept in our own masjid, and we shouldn't in this country. yet it is happening to Masjid al-Aqsa. And the Palestinians are doing that for us. Because remember, Masjid al-Aqsa does not belong to the Palestinians, it does not belong to the Arabs. It is the heritage of every Muslim wherever they are. And therefore, I think we have a responsibility first on the human rights level, on the aspect of international law, on the aspect of justice, but also as Muslims, brothers and sisters who are connected to Baitul Maqdis and Masjid al-Aqsa, then we have that added responsibility to do whatever we can. Jazakallah khair.
Okay. Jazakumullah khairan to Dr. Ismail for the wonderful summary of what we needed to hear. Alhamdulillah. It's very beneficial, very informative, and also gives us a lot to go back with and inshallah help the cause of Palestine as well, inshallah. Especially the BDS movement, boycotting and sanctioning and things like this, we should definitely bring it into practice. What I'll do now, inshallah, is we'll open the floor up for questions, inshallah, to Dr. Ismail. After that, I'll request the brothers to stay behind because we'll pray Asr Salah, inshallah. And then there's refreshments, and there's some things you can buy as well on your way out. All proceeds will go to Palestine, inshallah. So please do donate as well. Any donation you make today will also go to Palestine. So please do donate. So any questions from the brother side? Any questions? Sisters can also let Muallima know upstairs if they have any questions, and she can relay it to me. Any questions? Questions?
Okay. Actually, just while this, sorry, this was supposed to be the last slide, I missed it. This is what has happened from 1888 to today. You can see that in 1888, 5% of the population of what's known as Palestine was Jewish. Today it's 81%. 85% was Muslim, 12% now is Muslim. Christian population has been reduced as well to 5%. And you see that this has been a slow process of getting rid of Palestinians. And this process is going on a daily basis. It doesn't stop. You know, like I mentioned to you, just what's happening now, last year, it's carrying on. And really, you know, sometimes we wonder how did a few Europeans manage to get rid of the whole indigenous Americans? How did they go and get rid of the Aborigines in Australia? You know, where were the rest of the world doing? What's happening now in front of us? And we don't want another ethnic cleansing taking place while we're alive. It's a very sad scenario, but we can do something about it. You know, this is the thing. We can do something about it. And as long as we are active, inshallah, we can bring about a change.
So, Dr. Ismail, could you just tell everyone, I mean, what can they go back with and start doing from now onwards? Just in summary.
Sure. I mean, I think some of the stuff I've already touched on what we can do is first and foremost is education. I think at the individual level, we really need to educate ourselves. And it's important not simply because what's happening in Palestine, but that allows you to also understand the thing about Palestine is it's a template of what is happening in different parts of the world, in a lesser or greater degree. How other regimes have adopted the Israeli tactic against the Palestinians from not just oppressing the indigenous, but also then how to export the narrative, how to make what they're doing justifiable to the rest of the world. And that is very important. That's the kind of stuff you would learn, and that hopefully should also help us here in this country, how the narrative of Muslims is being portrayed in this country. Because you can see there's parallels there. So let's educate ourselves, let's educate our children, let's take the message to also our neighbors and friends and people we work with. I think we should, once we have enough confidence, then we can talk about it. And once we start talking about it, more and more people, I think it's important. Again, we live in a democratic country, and I think we shouldn't be shy about lobbying our elected leaders about this issue. And that, again, can be done at an individual level. We can take that on board and do whatever we can. Of course, we mentioned about BDS. We can try and engage in that. But we can also hopefully, and this is an invitation to Aberdeen, is hopefully if you can have a branch of FOA, Friends of Alaqsa, then we can do a lot more stuff here as well and try and hopefully increase the awareness and make this issue really national and international as well, so that more and more people can get to work in general.
Do the brothers still have any questions? No? Okay, that's fine, inshallah. So we'll have adhan take place, inshallah, pray salah. There are some refreshments for the brothers downstairs, also for the sisters. And please do donate, inshallah, whatever small amount you can, inshallah. You can use the card readers. If you have cash, you can give cash. And anything you purchase as well also will go towards Palestine, inshallah. So we'll have adhan, pray salah, and then offers of reading. Jazakumullah khair to Dr. Ismail for coming all the way up to Aberdeen and delivering this lecture. And we hope to have, establish maybe a branch of Friends of Al-Aqsa over here in Aberdeen, and hope to have Dr. Ismail up more often as well, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair.